Late summer, 1944. Texas heat pressed down on the barbed wire fences of a prisoner-of-war camp outside Hearn. Cicadas shrieked from oak trees, sun shimmered across steel wires, and the men in line, German soldiers who had marched deserts and bled in Italy, shifted uneasily, waiting. Then came the smell. A crackle, a hiss, fat hitting hot iron. Smoke spiraled into the sky, carrying the scent of grilled beef. For men who had lived on ersatz barley coffee, sawdust-stretched bread, and watery potato peel soup, the aroma was almost cruel. Meat had become a memory, now floating just beyond reach. The line moved forward. Trays clattered. And then, the impossible. A soft white bun, a patty of beef shimmering with juices, a slice of onion, mustard and ketchup smeared atop. Not rations, not scraps. A hamburger. The first bite was confusion. Salt, fat, sweetness, smoke. Bread that yielded softly, not like the dense rye of home. A diary later revealed one soldier's turmoil. I was ashamed to enjoy it, yet I devoured it. Propaganda had claimed America was starving and decadent. But here, even prisoners were given 3,200 calories a day, while German civilians back home averaged fewer than 1,500. Imagine biting into freedom while your sister traded her wedding ring for half a ham. Imagine savoring beef while families stood in lines for scraps. Each chew gnawed not only at hunger, but at certainty. One whispered to another, "If this is how they treat us, their enemies, how do they treat their own people?" In that question lay the first crack in the wall. A meal that was more than food. A symbol that the world beyond propaganda was not the one they had been taught to believe. And soon, that crack would widen, because behind the wire waited not just another meal, but an entire world of abundance the prisoners could scarcely imagine. At first, the hamburger felt like a miracle, a rare spark in captivity. Yet the days that followed revealed something more unsettling. It was not an exception. It was routine. Each morning, trays slid across the mess line, stacked with white bread so soft it collapsed under a thumb. Cold milk poured into tin cups from tall metal pitchers. At dinner, butter, golden, thick, unapologetic, was handed out in slabs generous enough to coat the bread until it glistened. And sometimes pies arrived, flaky, filled with apples or berries, baked by local women, carried into the camp kitchens as if the summer sun had itself pressed them into shape. Then came the summer shock. Steel tubs packed with ice rolled into the mess hall. Out came scoops of vanilla ice cream, sliding into bowls that sweated in the heat. Some prisoners laughed nervously. Others stared in disbelief, spooning the cold sweetness as though it might vanish before they swallowed. One diary entry captures it. "For a moment, I forgot I was a captive. I was only a man eating ice cream." Ice cream had disappeared from Germany in 1939, deemed non-essential. Now, it was served without question. The contrast with home was unbearable. Diaries tell of sisters trading wedding rings for scraps of ham, mothers boiling nettles in a soup, fathers slicing bread so thin it seemed paper. In Berlin, lines for rations stretched around corners. In Texas, prisoners spread butter thickly, drank milk freely, and savored ice cream until tongues went numb. Guilt mingled with gratitude. Some whispered that America was wasteful, others that it was unimaginably strong. Barracks erupted in debate. Was this kindness or a weapon of the mind? Proof of strength or a test to soften them? Letters home, carefully censored, hinted at abundance. "We are well fed," wrote one prisoner. Another described bread as soft as clouds. Families reading between the lines in bombed-out Germany could sense the truth. Sons in captivity ate better than they did in freedom. Every meal chipped away at certainty. Propaganda had promised a hollow, chaotic, weak America. Reality brought bowls of ice cream and mugs of coffee, served not in triumph, but in routine. Quiet abundance left deeper scars than violence. Yet one question lingered. Where did it all come from? How could a nation at war across two oceans feed soldiers, civilians, and enemies so lavishly? The answer would not be found on their plates, but in the fields, factories, and endless machinery of a nation that turned food into power. The men had come to expect full plates inside the wire, but it was what they saw beyond the fences that left them speechless. Work details sometimes carried prisoners onto the vast plains of Texas and the Midwest. There, land stretched endlessly, broken only by neat rows of wheat and corn shimmering under the sun. Combines, hulking machines with steel jaws devoured fields in minutes. For men who had grown up bending their backs with scythes and horses, the sight was alien. One machine replaced dozens of hands. One field fed thousands. It was not just abundance, it was scale. They had been told America was soft, fractured, incapable of endurance. Yet here was a nation where food was harvested with the same precision as weapons, where fields ran to the horizon, barns overflowed, and yet bombs still fell in Europe. Transport trucks rolled past assembly plants, carrying more than supplies. At Willow Run in Michigan, conveyor belts moved B-24 bombers, finished at a pace of one every hour. Metal clanged, sparks flew from welders, the rhythm of hammers echoing like a giant heart. To men who believed war machines took months to craft, the sight was crushing. America did not only outgun, it outproduced. The hamburger they first bit into became more than food. It became a symbol of something larger, an empire of plenty, fueled by fields that never emptied and factories that never rested. Diaries captured the disbelief. If they can do this for us, their enemies, how can we ever hope to defeat them? Others fell into silence, staring at endless convoys of trucks that carried both bread and bullets with equal ease. Every passing day fractured a story they had once carried with pride, that the Reich stood as the future and America was decadent and weak. For the first time, certainty cracked beyond repair. They were witnessing a civilization whose strength lay not in cruelty, but in capacity. Farms and factories blurred into one image, a machine that could feed and destroy with casual abundance. And yet, what unsettled them most was not only the machines or the harvests. It was the faces of ordinary Americans. Farmers, guards, kitchen workers handed out food or nodded in greeting as if war were far away. Behind the efficiency lay something human, something they had not been prepared to meet. It was in these quiet, personal encounters that the next illusions would begin to collapse. Barbed wire was meant to divide, to remind men daily that they were captives. Yet in the quiet rhythms of camp life, the wire sometimes felt like little more than a frame. Behind it, gestures slipped through that no guard tower could prevent. One evening, a guard leaned casually against the mess hall counter. As trays passed by, he nudged an extra slice of pie onto a prisoner's plate. No words, just a glance, a shrug. For a man who hadn't seen sugar in years, that wedge of apple pie carried more weight than rations or rules. Diaries later recorded the memory. It was not charity. It was recognition of humanity. In the fields, where prisoners labored long hours under the Texas sun, farmers sometimes pulled sandwiches from lunch pails and shared them across the line. Thick slabs of ham, crisp lettuce, soft white bread. No lecture, no warning. Just food passed from hand to hand, an act so casual it stung harder than any bullet. On Sundays, music drifted across campgrounds. Local bands set up near the fences, brass horns and guitars ringing into the air. Guards and prisoners alike stood listening. Barbecues sent the scent of smoked beef wafting across the camp. For Germans raised on marching songs and speeches, the sound of swing and blues while savoring meat that melted off the bone was disorienting. It spoke of freedom, not just political, but cultural, a freedom that pulsed through ordinary life. For many, these moments were harder to process than the factories or the fields. Machines could be explained. Efficiency could be respected. But kindness? That was something their training had not prepared them to meet. The Reich had preached that the enemy was cruel, fractured, decadent. Yet here, guards offered second helpings. Children waved from farmhouses. Music played while prisoners chewed barbecue ribs with sticky fingers. At night, men lay in barracks trying to reconcile what they had seen. Some argued it was all a trick, propaganda in reverse. Others confessed it was the first time doubt had crept into their minds about the world they had once fought to defend. In one diary, a soldier reflected, "It is easier to fight bombs than kindness. Bombs harden, kindness unsettles." The impact of these small gestures could not be measured in calories or tonnage. They were memories, sharp enough to pierce ideology. And as the war moved toward its end, the question shifted. When these men returned home, what would they carry back to a broken Germany? The echo of orders and salutes, or the memory of pie, sandwiches, and music across the wire? That answer would shape what came next, because captivity was ending, but its lessons were only beginning. In 1946, the gates opened. The war was over, and men who had crossed oceans in chains now stepped back into a Germany that hardly resembled the home they had left. Cities were rubble. Streets echoed with silence, broken only by hammers salvaging bricks. Hunger lingered in every doorway. Families, thinner and older, met returning soldiers with both relief and sorrow. Yet within the memories these men carried was something Germany had not prepared them for. Not the clang of bombs or the glare of searchlights, but the taste of bread so white it almost shone. The laughter of children who had never gone hungry. The sight of hamburgers served to prisoners while mothers in the Reich boiled weeds for soup. Some prisoners spoke little of it, unwilling to wound families already scarred by deprivation. Others told stories in fragments. Milk served cold and plentiful. Ice cream on a summer day. Guards handing out pie without a second thought. For their children and grandchildren, these fragments became seeds. Quiet lessons about a different way of living. About abundance, not as waste, but as strength. About democracy defended not only by armies, but expressed in the confidence of sharing plenty. Karl, one of many who returned, would years later sit with his grandchildren in a rebuilt Germany. They laughed when he told them the enemy had fed him hamburgers. To them it sounded absurd, almost comic. But Karl's eyes drifted elsewhere. For him, that hamburger was not a joke, it was revelation. Because what these men discovered was more than food. It was the collapse of an illusion. They learned that power could wear the face of generosity. That a hamburger could cut sharper than a bayonet. That ice cream, butter, and bread could do what bombs never could. Shake a man's faith in everything he thought was true. History often remembers battles, campaigns, and treaties. But for thousands of men, history was written differently. In the sizzle of beef on a hot grill. In the cold shock of sugar after years of substitutes. In the paradox that kindness wounds more deeply than cruelty. And so the memory endured. Quietly, invisibly, it shaped the way many saw the post-war world. When propaganda crumbled and cities lay in ruins, it was not always the rubble that stayed in their minds, but the taste of food that told them another future was possible. A hamburger, handed across a counter, became proof that bombs had not delivered. That truth can be carried not only in victory parades, but in the smallest human gestures. History, after all, is not always written in gunfire. Sometimes it is written in a single bite.